The massive shuttle carrying Ambassador Minjung Park descended through the purple clouds of Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Council. She pressed her face against the small window, watching the alien city grow larger below. Crystalline. Towers stretched impossibly high into the sky, their surfaces gleaming like diamonds. Each tower represented a different alien species, all united under one government that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Minjung adjusted her formal diplomatic uniform one last time. The dark blue fabric felt heavy on her shoulders, weighted down by the hopes of 40 billion humans scattered across 12 star systems. She carried with her a simple briefcase containing humanity's final attempt at peaceful integration into galactic society. For 30 years, humans had tried to join this council through diplomacy, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. Every attempt had been met with suspicion, delays, and outright rejection. As her shuttle touched down on the landing platform, Minjung could see the alien guards waiting. They were Zelathi warriors, tall and thin with grey skin that looked like polished stone. Their black eyes showed no emotion as they escorted her through the corridors toward the council chambers. The walls were covered in strange symbols that hurt her eyes to look at directly. The council chamber was enormous, with UUBP seating for representatives from over 200 different species. At the center sat the High Council, 12 beings who made the major decisions for the entire galaxy. Minjung had studied each of them for years, learning their customs, their languages, and their prejudices. She knew this would be her only chance to speak before them. Councillor Vextar, the Zelathi representative, was already speaking when Minjung entered. His voice echoed through the chamber like grinding metal. The humans continue to spread like a disease across the outer systems. They claim territories that have been restricted for centuries. They build colonies without permission and ignore our warnings. Minjung walked slowly to the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of thousands of alien eyes upon her. She had given speeches before, but never with stakes this high. She activated her translator device and began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Honored councillors, I come before you today not as a conqueror or a threat, but as a representative of a species that wants only to find its place among the stars. Humanity has always sought peace. We have never attacked another species. We have never stolen resources or enslaved populations. We have simply grown, as all living things must grow. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some aliens clicked their mandibles in what might have been approval. Others made sounds that her translator couldn't interpret. But Vextar's expression remained cold and hostile. You speak of growth, Vextar replied, but what you describe is invasion. Your species appeared in our galaxy barely 50 years ago, and already you occupy 12 systems. You reproduce at an alarming rate. Your technology advances too quickly. You are unpredictable and dangerous. Minjung opened her briefcase and pulled out a data tablet. Councillor Vextar, I have here the complete legal documentation for every human colony. Each world we settled was uninhabited. Each system, we claimed, followed galactic law precisely. We have broken no treaties because we were never allowed to sign any. She activated the tablet, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber showing star charts, legal documents, and survey data. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Humanity had followed every rule, crossed every T and dotted every I, but instead of acceptance, the display of evidence seemed to anger the council even more. Vextar stood from his seat, his grey skin darkening with rage. You dare to lecture, thus about law? You children who have barely learned to walk among the stars, we have maintained order in this galaxy since before your species discovered fire. Other councillors began to speak at once, their voices rising in a cacophony of different languages. Minjung could hear words like arrogant, primitive, and threat even through the translation static. She realized with growing horror that they had never intended to listen to her arguments. This hearing was nothing more than a formality before they delivered their final rejection. If that is your decision, Minjung said, her voice cutting through the noise, then humanity will remember how we were treated here today. We came in peace, offering friendship and cooperation. We will not forget that you chose hostility instead. She began to pack up her materials, preparing to leave. the chamber. But as she turned toward the exit, she saw Vextar's hand moving toward something concealed beneath his robes. Years of diplomatic training had taught her to read body language across species, and every instinct screamed danger. "They have chosen war," she managed to whisper into her communication device before the energy blast tore through her chest. The last thing she saw was the look of satisfaction on Vextar's face as her vision faded to black. The quantum communication burst reached Earth's orbital stations at exactly 1432 Greenwich Standard Time. Within minutes, every human world, space, station, mining colony, and deep space vessel had received the same terrible message. Ambassador Min Jung Park was dead, murdered in cold blood during what was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting. On Earth, President Hyunwoo Kim stood in his private office, staring out at the city lights of New Seoul stretching to the horizon. His aide, a young woman named Ji-hee, had delivered the news with tears in her eyes. The president's hands shook as he read the final transmission from Nexus Prime. 3 words that would change everything. They have chosen war. Within the hour, emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming across all human worlds. President Kim appeared on every screen, his face grave but composed. "My fellow humans," he began, his voice carrying the weight of 40 billion souls. "Today, we lost not just an ambassador, but a friend to all humanity. Min Jung Park died trying to secure peace for our species. She was murdered while under diplomatic protection, in violation of every galactic law and treaty." The president paused, letting the words sink in. Across human space, families gathered around their screens. Children who had never known war watched their parents' faces change. Min Jung's sacrifice will not be forgotten, but more importantly, her death marks the end of one chapter in human history and the beginning of another. What President Kim didn't say, what he couldn't say on public broadcasts, was that Min Jung had been far more than a diplomat. She had been part of a carefully selected group of humans, genetically modified and psychologically conditioned to serve as living restraints on humanity's darker impulses. For 30 years, voices like hers had guided human policy, always choosing negotiation over conflict, always seeking peaceful solutions. Now that voice was silenced forever, deep beneath the surface of Mars. In a facility that didn't exist on any official records, Admiral So-Young Lee received a message that made her blood run cold. The communication was encrypted with codes known only to 12 people in human space. The Prometheus Division, humanity's most classified military program, was finally being activated. Admiral Lee had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come. She was a small woman with grey streaks in her black hair, but her eyes held the sharpness of someone who had seen too much. As she read the orders, her expression never changed, but her fingers tightened on the datapad until her knuckles went white. "Condition Omega is now in effect," the message read. "All Prometheus assets are to proceed with Protocol 7 immediately. Authorization. Kim Hyun-woo, President of the Terran Federation. May God forgive us all." Within hours, seemingly impossible things began happening across human space. Factories that had been producing farming equipment and civilian electronics suddenly retooled their assembly lines overnight. Workers arrived at their jobs to find their machines manufacturing components they didn't recognize, following blueprints that had been classified for decades. On the agricultural world of New, Fosun factory supervisor Dong-Hyun Chang watched in amazement as his food processing plant transformed itself. Robotic arms that had been packaging rice and vegetables began assembling what looked like weapon components. When he called his supervisors, they simply told him to follow the new production schedules and ask no questions. Similar scenes played out on dozens of worlds. Shipyards that built cargo vessels began constructing warships with designs no one had ever seen. Mining operations shifted from extracting rare metals for trade to gathering materials with very specific properties. The pace was incredible, as if humanity had been preparing for this moment for years, and they had been. In the outer colonies, another kind of preparation was taking place. Transport ships arrived at border worlds like Jeju Station and New Daegu, officially there for routine supply runs. But instead of dropping off cargo, they began loading children and families. Parents were told it was a temporary evacuation, just a precaution while tensions with the Galactic Council were high. 10-year-old Minho watched from his transport ship window as his homeworld of New Andong grew smaller and smaller. His mother, Da Young, held him close, but wouldn't explain why they had to leave so suddenly. All she would say was that they were going somewhere safer, somewhere the family could be together no matter what happened next. The Galactic Council's intelligence networks noticed the unusual activity, of course. Spy satellites detected the massive movement of ships and resources. Alien agents embedded in human society reported the factory retooling and the civilian evacuations. But their analysts made a critical mistake. They assumed humanity was simply panicking, making empty threats and desperate preparations they would never follow through with. After all, humans had been peaceful for 30 years. They had never shown anything but restraint and diplomacy. Even when provoked, they had always chosen negotiation over violence. The Council's experts were convinced this was all just posturing, a way for humanity to save face after their ambassadors' death. They had no idea that the peaceful humans they had known for 30 years were never the real humanity at all. The morning of the third day dawned normally on Nexus Prime. The alien citizens went about their daily routines, shopping in the crystal markets and traveling between the towering spires that housed different species. The Galactic Council was in session, discussing trade disputes and border negotiations as if nothing had changed. They had already forgotten about the human ambassador whose life they had taken. Then, at exactly noon local time, the sun disappeared. Not gradually, like a natural eclipse. One moment the purple sky was bright with Nexus Prime's twin suns, and the next moment everything was plunged into absolute darkness. Streetlights flickered on automatically, but their glow seemed weak and sickly against the unnatural blackness above. In the council chambers, emergency alarms began blaring. Councillor Vextar, the same being who had murdered Min Jung 3 days earlier, stood at the great viewing window staring up at the void where the sky should have been. "Get me a sensor reading," he barked at his assistants. "What's causing this phenomenon?" The answer came from the orbital defense stations first. Commander Thexville of the Nexus Defense Fleet watched his displays with growing horror as massive objects appeared on his sensors. They weren't just ships. They were structures so large they blocked out the stars themselves. Hundreds of them. Then thousands, materializing from what looked like tears in space itself. "By the Ancient Ones," he whispered, "how many ships do the humans have?" Down in the council chambers, the first communication came through on all frequencies at once. Every radio, every communication device, every electronic system capable of receiving signals suddenly carried the same clear, calm voice. "Citizens of the Galactic Council, this is Admiral So Young Lee of the Human Defense Force. 3 days ago you murdered our ambassador during a peaceful diplomatic mission. You killed a woman who came to you in good faith, seeking only understanding between our species." The voice paused, and in that silence the aliens could hear something that chilled them to their cores. The sound of massive machinery powering up, transmitted from thousands of ships above their world. "Min Jung Park was our voice of peace," the Admiral continued. "She was our advocate for diplomacy, our hope for a future where humans and aliens could coexist. You silenced that voice forever. Now you will hear our other voice, the voice you never wanted to believe existed, Vextar." Rushed to the communication console and began broadcasting on the emergency frequencies. "This is Councillor Vexistar of the Galactic Council. You are in violation of galactic law by bringing a military fleet into our space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Admiral Lee's response came swiftly, and her tone had not changed at all. Still calm, still measured, as if she were discussing the weather. "Councillor Vextar, the being who personally murdered our ambassador, thank you for identifying yourself. That will make things much simpler." Above the planet, something began to happen that defied everything the aliens thought they knew about physics. Strange devices emerged from the human ships, objects that seemed to bend light around themselves. They positioned themselves at specific points around Nexus Prime and the surrounding space, creating a geometric pattern that stretched for millions of kilometers. When the devices activated, reality itself seemed to hiccup. The Galactic Council's defense fleets, massive formations of warships from dozens of different species, suddenly found themselves trapped in bubbles of distorted space-time. Their engines fired, but instead of moving forward, they found themselves traveling in circles, their sensors showing impossible readings. Some ships tried to jump to hyperspace, but emerged in the same location they had started, as if space itself had been folded into a maze with no exit. "What kind of technology is this?" demanded Admiral Kethmore of the Zalathi Imperial Fleet. His flagship, a dreadnought 3 kilometers long and armed with planet-killing weapons, was caught in one of these spatial distortions. Every time he tried to maneuver toward the human ships, his vessel ended up facing the opposite direction. The Zalathi had ruled the galaxy for centuries through superior firepower and military might. Their dreadnoughts were the most feared weapons in known space, capable of reducing entire worlds to ash. Admiral Kethmore decided to show these upstart humans the folly of challenging the Zalathi Empire. "All ships target the largest human vessel, and fire everything we have," he commanded. The Zalathi dreadnoughts opened fire with devastating energy beams that could slice through a moon. The beams struck the human flagship directly, a massive black vessel that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. For a moment, Kethmore allowed himself to smile. No ship could survive that much concentrated firepower. Then his smile faded as his sensors showed the impossible. The human ship was still there, completely undamaged. In fact, it looked like the energy beams had passed right through it, as if the vessel wasn't entirely present in normal space. The human ship's response came in the form of a single pulse of red light. Not a beam or a projectile, just a pulse that seemed to ripple through space itself. When it reached the Zalathi flagship, something extraordinary happened. The massive dreadnought simply stopped existing in the normal sense. It was still there, still visible, but it had become something else. A frozen moment in time, its crew trapped like insects in amber. Across the fleet, similar fates befell other ships that had dared to fire on the humans. Some found themselves phased partially, out of reality, unable to affect anything around them. Others discovered their weapons had been transformed into something harmless, their deadly energy cannons now producing nothing but colorful light shows. Admiral Kethmore, trapped on his temporal prison of a ship, finally understood the horrible truth. Humanity's 30 years of peaceful behavior hadn't been weakness or lack of military capability. It had been restraint. They had been holding back their true nature, their real strength, out of a desire for peace that the galaxy had repaid with murder. Now, with their voice of peace silenced forever, the galaxy was about to learn what humans were really capable of. And judging by what he was seeing, Kethmore realized that the Galactic Council had made the greatest mistake in galactic history. The humans weren't just technologically superior. They were so far advanced that they were playing by completely different rules, using weapons and technologies that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics themselves, and they were just getting started. The first clue came from an intercepted transmission on the outer rim world of Kethvara. The planet's communication specialists, a species known for their ability to decode any signal, picked up what seemed like routine chatter between human military units. But when they translated it, the words made no sense. "Ghost protocols are fully active," one human voice reported. "All restraint codes have been deactivated. Generation 7 subjects are experiencing full awakening." "Understood," came the reply. "Begin Phase 2, archaeological revival. All Prometheus sites are now operational." The alien analysts puzzled over these strange terms. What were restraint codes? What did they mean by archaeological revival? But as more intercepted messages poured in from across human space, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Dr. Yethmar, the galaxy's leading expert on human behavior, worked frantically in his laboratory on the Council world of Proxima Beta. For decades he had studied humanity, writing papers on their primitive emotional responses and uncontrolled aggression. He had always maintained that humans were a young species, barely evolved beyond their animal instincts. Now, as he analyzed the intercepted communications, His understanding of humanity began to crumble. "This can't be right," he muttered, staring at his computer screens. The data suggested that human DNA contained genetic sequences that were impossibly old, far older than humanity's supposed evolutionary timeline. More disturbing still, these ancient genes were now becoming active across the entire human population. On the mining world of Zirion Prime, the local Galactic Council garrison received reports that made their commander's blood run cold. The human workers in the orbital facilities weren't just continuing their jobs, they were building something. Massive construction projects had begun overnight, following blueprints that seemed to appear from nowhere. Captain Zolkirk led a team to investigate one of these construction sites. What they found defied explanation. The humans were building weapons, but not the kind anyone recognized. These devices looked ancient yet impossibly advanced, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Where did you get these designs?" Zolkirk demanded of the human foreman, a middle-aged man named Shung Min, who had always been quiet and cooperative. But the human who looked back at him was different now. Shung Min's eyes held a cold intelligence that seemed to see right through the alien officer. "We've always had these designs," he said calmly. "We just forgot about them for a while. But forgetting isn't the same as losing." The truth began to emerge piece by piece, like fragments of a nightmare slowly coming together. On the research world of Academia Prima, alien scientists made a discovery that shook the foundations of galactic history. Deep in their archives, they found references to an ancient species known only as the Architects, beings who had conquered vast regions of the galaxy millions of years ago, then mysteriously vanished. The descriptions matched perfectly with human physiology. Dr. Kima Vexthal, a renowned galactic historian, presented her findings to an emergency session of the Council's Scientific Committee. "The evidence is undeniable," she said, her voice shaking. "Humans aren't a young species at all. They're the descendants of the most powerful warrior race in galactic history, a species that chose to abandon their conquests and hide their true nature." The recordings she played sent chills through every alien present. Ancient automated systems, dormant for millions of years, had suddenly activated across dozens of worlds. These systems recognized human genetic signatures and began broadcasting messages in languages that predated most galactic civilizations. "Welcome back, children of the First War," the messages said. "Your time of peace is ended. Reclaim what was always yours." But perhaps the most terrifying discovery came when the Scytheta, the galaxy's most powerful telepathic species, attempted to probe human minds directly. The Scytheta had ended countless wars through mental domination, reaching into enemy minds and crushing their will to fight. Elder Mindweaver Thessara led the assault on a human research station, confident that her mental powers could break human resistance in seconds. She had broken the minds of entire armies before. Humans, with their supposedly primitive brains, should have been easy prey. The moment she touched the mind of Dr. Jinwoo Park, a human researcher, everything went wrong. Instead of the simple, emotional thoughts she expected, Thessara found herself falling into an abyss of alien intelligence that seemed to stretch back millions of years. The human's mind wasn't primitive at all. It was a fortress built from eons of warfare, defended by mental structures that were completely foreign to anything in her experience. And it was hungry. The human mind didn't just resist her psychic attack. It devoured it, turning her own mental energy against her. Thessara screamed as her consciousness was flooded with memories that weren't her own. Images of star systems burning, of civilizations rising and falling like waves, of wars fought with weapons that could rewrite reality itself. She saw the truth of what humans really were. They weren't newcomers to the galaxy. They were its former masters, returning from a self-imposed exile. The peaceful, emotional beings the Council had known were artificial constructs, carefully engineered personas designed to suppress their true nature. Across the galaxy, similar psychic assaults failed catastrophically. Telepathic species that had dominated galactic politics for centuries found themselves helpless against human minds that operated on completely different principles. Some alien telepaths fell into comas after contact with human thoughts. Others went insane, babbling about the deep memories and the old wars. On Earth, in the deepest vaults beneath the presidential palace, archaeologists worked around the clock to uncover artifacts that had been buried for millions of years. These weren't human artifacts. They were left by humanity's true ancestors, the architects who had once ruled half the galaxy. President Hyunwoo Kim stood in one of these ancient chambers, watching as his people activated technology that shouldn't exist. Weapons that could fold space, shields that existed in multiple dimensions at once, engines that drew power from the quantum foam itself. "How long have we known?" he asked Admiral So-Young Lee, who stood beside him examining a device that seemed to phase in and out of reality. "The inner circle has always known," she replied. "Every generation we've maintained the knowledge while keeping it hidden from ourselves. Min-jung and others like her were our conscious minds, engineered to keep us peaceful. But unconsciously, we never stopped preparing for the day we might need to remember who we really are." The Admiral activated a display showing human fleets across the galaxy. Each ship now bore the ancient symbols of the architects, weapons, and technologies awakening after millions of years of dormant sleep. "The Council thought they were dealing with children playing at war," Admiral Lee continued. "They had no idea they were poking a sleeping dragon that had conquered most of the galaxy before their civilizations even existed." As reports poured in from across human space, the scope of the deception became clear. Humanity's rapid expansion, over 30 years hadn't been expansion at all. It had been a return to territories they had once owned. Every world they colonized had ancient human ruins buried beneath the surface. Every star system they claimed held the remains of architect. Technology. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity hadn't been building a civilization for 30 years. They had been quietly reclaiming an empire that had never truly ended. The crystal spires of Nexus Prime, once symbols of galactic unity and alien pride, now lay in carefully organized piles of rubble. Human engineers moved with quiet efficiency, their cutting tools slicing through structures that had stood for over 1,000 years. They worked without hatred or anger, treating the demolition like any other construction project. Admiral So-Young Lee stood on the observation deck of what used to be the Galactic Council's main chamber, watching the systematic dismantling of an empire. 6 months ago, this room had been filled with alien dignitaries who saw humans as primitive newcomers. Now it was empty except for the occasional human technician checking structural integrity. The war, if it could even be called that, had lasted exactly 43 days. It hadn't been the massive battles that galactic historians had expected. There were no planet-killing weapons unleashed, no desperate last stands, no heroic sacrifices. Instead, humanity had demonstrated their capabilities through what their military reports classified as minor enforcement actions. The Zalathi Empire, rulers of the galaxy for centuries, had surrendered after a single human ship disabled their entire home fleet without firing a shot. The proud warriors who had conquered dozens of species watched helplessly as their weapons simply stopped working, their ship's computers displaying messages in ancient human script. "Please stand down. Resistance is unnecessary." The Altarian Federation, masters of psychic warfare, capitulated when their most powerful mind readers fell into comas after attempting to probe human thoughts. Those who recovered spoke in whispers about memories, older than stars, and thoughts that burned like ice. One by one, every major galactic power had made the same choice: surrender rather than face the full might of awakened humanity. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty chamber as a group of figures approached Admiral Lee. These were the survivors of the Galactic Council, representatives from species across the galaxy who had once wielded power over billions of beings. Now they walked with the careful steps of prisoners approaching judgment. Councillor Vextar was among them, the Zalathi who had murdered Min-jung Park 6 months earlier. His grey skin had lost its polished sheen, and his black eyes no longer held the arrogance that had defined his species for generations. Behind him walked 12 other council members, each representing civilizations that had ruled sectors of space for millennia. They knelt before Admiral Lee without being asked. The gesture was not part of human demands or alien protocol. It was simply the natural response of beings who finally understood their place in the galaxy's true hierarchy. "Admiral Lee," Vextar spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper, We beg for mercy. Our species surrender completely to human authority. We ask only that you allow our civilizations to continue existing." Admiral Lee looked down at the beings who had once commanded fleets capable of destroying solar systems. She felt no satisfaction in their surrender, no joy in their humiliation. If anything, she felt tired. This was not how humanity had wanted things to end. "Before I respond to your request," she said, activating a small device in her hand, "there is someone who wanted to speak to you one final time." The air above the kneeling aliens shimmered, and suddenly Min Jung Park stood before them, as if she had never died. The holographic projection was so perfect that several council members gasped and drew back. But this wasn't the Min Jung who had died in these very chambers 6 months ago. This recording had been made before her final mission, when she still believed peace was possible. "If you are seeing this message," the holographic Min Jung began, "then I am dead, and humanity has revealed its true nature to the galaxy. I want you to understand something that I tried to explain during our last meeting, something you refused to hear." The image of Min Jung walked among the kneeling aliens, her expression sad, but not angry. "I told you that humanity valued peace. Above all else, that was true. For 30 years we chose restraint over revenge, diplomacy over domination, hope over history. We could have reclaimed our ancient territories by force. We could have reminded the galaxy who we really are. Instead, we chose to try living as equals among species we once ruled." Vextar's hands trembled as the holographic ambassador stopped directly in front of him. "You answered our offer of friendship with murder. You killed the voice of peace because you were too proud to listen to what it was saying. Now you know what humanity values even more than peace: justice." The hologram began to fade, but Min Jung's final words echoed clearly through the chamber. "I forgive you for what you did to me, but forgiveness and consequences are not the same thing. The galaxy will remember this day, and it will remember why it happened. May you govern more wisely than you chose to live." As the hologram disappeared, Admiral Lee addressed the kneeling council members. "Min Jung Park will be remembered as the first martyr of the new galactic order. Her name will be spoken with reverence on every world, by every species, as a reminder of what happens when peace is repaid with violence." She gestured toward the windows, where human ships could be seen beginning construction projects across the city. "We are not here to destroy your civilizations or enslave your peoples. We are here to ensure that what happened to Min Jung never happens again. The galaxy will be rebuilt under human oversight, with human protection and with human justice." "Admiral," Lee paused, looking each council member in the eye, "your species will continue to exist. Your cultures will be preserved. Your people will be free to live their lives as they choose. But you will never again hold the power to murder ambassadors, to wage wars of conquest, or to oppress those weaker than yourselves." Outside the chamber, the work of rebuilding continued. Human engineers weren't just tearing down the old order, they were constructing something new. Schools where young aliens would learn alongside human children. Hospitals that combined the best medical knowledge from across the galaxy. Trade centers where commerce could flow freely between species without the corruption and favoritism that had plagued the old council. As the months passed, something remarkable happened. The galaxy didn't resist human rule, it embraced it. Species that had been oppressed by the council for generations found themselves free to pursue their own destinies. Wars that had raged for decades simply ended when human peacekeepers arrived to enforce ceasefires. The sky above Nexus Prime, which had been dark for those terrifying 3 days, gradually returned to its normal purple hue. But everyone who looked up remembered the darkness, and they understood its meaning. Humanity had chosen to let the light return, but that choice could be changed at any moment. In quiet conversations across the galaxy, alien parents told their children about the day the humans came home. They spoke of Min Jung Park, the ambassador, who died for peace, and of the awakening that followed her death. They taught their young ones to respect the humans, not just for their power, but for their restraint in using it. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity was back where it belonged, and this time, they would never forget who they really were.